Christmas in July is here, and if you're like me, you probably start collecting ideas or even get started making your holiday cards. In this video, I'm sharing 4 festive projects that are cozy, cute, and totally craft-worthy. I've got a gingerbread man, a cocoa-filled penguin mug, and even a sweet pair of hands holding a holiday greeting, all made using some must-see dies from Spellbinders. And make sure to stick around because in card number 3, I'll also show you a surprising embossing trick that turns a regular heartfelt plate into a dimensional background. Let's dive in. I'll start creating my first card using the 3D embossing folder of the month. This one's called Starry Snowfall. It's such a pretty folder and I'll be using it to create the background. I'm using the large die of the month called Mugs and Mittens for the focal point of the card, which are the mittens and sweater sleeves, and I'm skipping the dies that create the cup of hot chocolate. I'm pulling one of 2 sentiments from the Arctic Glimmer set, which is the glimmer of the month, but I apologize for showing you the wrong foil here because I got it mixed up with another kit. I'm not using the glimmer plate itself for this card, but you'll see me use it on another one later. For this one, I'll hot foil the sentiment that says sending winter hugs. I'll do the foiling off camera since my Gemini foiling machine isn't set up in this workspace right now. I'll be right back with the finished foil piece and the rest of the die cutting. Alright, so I've done all the die cutting and I want to walk you through what I have done and how the pieces work together. Let's start with the mittens. There are 3 parts: the inside, the main body of the mitten, and the thumb. Each die cut has etched guides to help with assembly. For example, this is for the right hand, and the thumb fits perfectly into this section right here. Moving on to the sleeves, there are actually 3 parts here too. There's a die that cuts out the pattern center of the sleeve. If you don't use that center die, you'll just get a solid piece, which is also totally fine. You could stencil a pattern using the warm and woven stencil of the month and then cut out the sleeves from that instead of using the insert die, which creates a pierced pattern. It's just another option. The cuff pieces were also die cut. I used a tiny scrap of brushed silver cardstock to cut half a snowflake just so I can tuck it behind the sentiment later on for a bit of shine. Now, the sentiment foil plates don't come with coordinating dies, so I cut it out like a strip and used a corner rounder to give it a soft oval look. And of course, here's that embossed background using the Starry Snowfall folder. I love the dimension on this one. Let's get started with assembly. Starting with the gloves, I'll use my tweezers to hold the die cuts because I find it much easier, especially when following contours and etched guidelines. You could consider doing some ink blending first to add more interest, but I decided to keep it simple today. Alright, that's glued down, just letting it dry for a minute before adding the thumb piece. These etched guides make it so easy to get everything aligned. Now, moving on to the sleeves, it's exactly the same idea. There's a guide on the die cut that shows exactly how to position the pieces. Looks like I die cut the smaller cuffs. You can use the small cuffs to layer onto the larger one, and I would have absolutely done that, except I accidentally cut out the larger cuffs with the same blue, so it wouldn't look good to layer them together. I could have cut it out with a contrasting color again, but chose not to. Blame it on my laziness. Okay, I've cut the right size sleeves now, and this is how they'll go. Now I'll attach the embossed panel to the card base with some foam tape that I salvaged from another card. I don't throw anything out. Here I'll use my scoring board to get everything in place properly by butting up the card base into the corner of the scoring board and doing the same with the card front. I'll add a bit of glue as well to give me a few more seconds to slide it into position. I'm using a small piece of rolled up painter's tape to hold the card base shut while I adhere the emboss panel. The sides of the scoring board will help keep everything aligned provided you have both sides of the card base and panel flush with the sides of the scoring board. I noticed that one side of the panel is slightly shorter and the other is a tiny bit long, so I'll trim those edges before adding anything else to the front. There we go. The thicker edge was a little tricky, but we're good. I just removed a tiny sliver and now it's even. Time to finish assembling the front. I'll line up the sleeves at the bottom and the sentiment will go in the middle to create the look of the hand holding it. Let me just tuck it in a bit more. And I was hoping to leave part of this open so I could tuck in the sentiment, but I accidentally glued both sides down. That's all right. I'll just slide it in as best I can. I tried using a craft knife to open it up again, but that didn't really work, so I'll just glue it down. Everything's perfectly aligned now, so I'll use a scrap piece of cardstock to apply the glue in various places and adhere it all in place without shifting anything. Since I'll add some dimension to the sentiment, I chose to glue the hands down directly onto the card base. Otherwise, it would create too much bulk when mailing the card. And now I'll add a bit of foam tape behind the sentiment to pop it up, plus a little more glue so I can slide it exactly where I want it. I think that's looking good. Now I'll apply some glue to the half snowflake and use the scrap cardstock again to remove any excess and slide the snowflake in under the greeting. And that's our first finished card. It came together so simply and quickly. In the next segment, I'll show you how you can use your small dies to create a shaped gift tag. Keep watching. Now, let's move on to the next project using this adorable little die set. You can actually create this one as a mug using the included die, but I won't be doing that today. Instead, I'll be making the gingerbread man as a gift tag, and I'll show you exactly how I do it. This die set includes both the outline and the gingerbread man insert. So if you want the complete design, you'll need to use both dies together. The outline measures just under 3 inches, so to make a folded tag, I'll need a piece of cardstock that's about 6 inches in length and about 2¼ inches wide. So I'm cutting a piece that's 2½ inches by 6 inches. Next, I'll use my scoring board and score at the 3-inch mark right in the middle. Now, here's a little trick. If I cut this shape in its entirety from the middle of the piece, I'll end up with 2 separate pieces. But I want a folded tag, so I'll position the die to just slightly hang over the folded edge so it stays connected at the top. I'll go ahead and cut that and I'll be right back. Okay, see how the top is connected and we've now got this cute little folded gift tag. Next, I'll cut out the gingerbread man with both the outline and insert piece from a piece of craft cardstock. I'll also cut out the trimmings from some white cardstock. Now, if you were using this to create a mug, the instructions show you how to cut it out so it turns into a mug, but I'm skipping that step. All right, I've got everything cut and wow, the static cling today is real. These tiny bits are just jumping off the plate, so I'm carefully collecting the little pieces, being careful not to lose anything. I'll start by lightly sketching in the outlines for the eyes, mouth, and buttons with a pencil where I need to color behind the die cuts. Just making sure I get the eyes and mouth in the right spots. I was planning to use a couple of alcohol markers to color in the eyes, cheeks, and mouth, but fortunately I realized in the nick of time that the alcohol markers might bleed through the cardstock. So instead, I'm switching to my regular water-based markers to prevent any bleed through. I'll use a regular black gel pen to color in the eyes. I'm coloring slightly outside the penciled outline to ensure there are no white spaces showing through the die cuts. I'm double checking to ensure the eyes are completely colored in with no white showing. I'll do the same for the mouth. I can still see the pencil marks, so I'll erase them, although the top layer will cover most of it. I'll add some accents to the eyes and buttons with a white gel pen and glue down the top layer to the gift tag. I'll go ahead and add the other missing bits, which are the trims for the arms and legs, and not forgetting the cheeks, which I'll color using a light pink. Now, to turn this into a gift tag, I'll punch a hole through the tag and use a piece of blue and white gingham ribbon from my stash. And last but not least, I'll stamp from and to on the inside of the tag. Isn't this adorable? For my next card, I'll be using a surprising technique because I want to stretch my supplies and I love the effect it creates. Let's get into it. To start, let me show you what I've cut out. I'll also walk you through the dies as I go. I'm using the glimmer of the month for this one, and it's called Arctic Glimmer, but the foil I'm using is called Speckled Prism. Like I mentioned at the beginning of my video, I got the contents a little mixed up and used the incorrect foil. The one that will come with your kit is silver. Anyway, so I tried hot foiling it, and this is how it turned out because the paper wasn't super smooth, so the foil didn't transfer perfectly. I usually don't have a lot of luck when foiling on colored cardstock. I'll need to work on that. However, I don't want to waste the panel, so I trimmed it down and used my silver gel pen on this narrow panel to color in the areas that didn't foil properly. I'll save the other piece and touch it up when I'm ready to use it. I'm not the kind of person who throws things out, as you know. So yes, I'm a bit of a hoarder, but I like to think of it as conserving materials. Now, this glimmer plate comes with two sentiments, and I used one of them on the first card, if you remember. Now, here's the surprise technique. So I took a piece of fog cardstock and I dry embossed it using the hot foil plate with the rubber embossing mat in my Spellbinders Platinum 6. It turned out beautifully. The embossed side doesn't look as sharp, but look at the impression on the debossed side. If you compare it to the foiled version, this is much more defined. Now, this edge of the plate wasn't straight, so that impression also came through in the embossing. That's where I'll use the narrow foiled panel to cover that bit. That works so perfectly. So what I did was cut a strip from the foiled piece to cover the slightly uneven part of the embossed panel. That way I hide the imperfections and I can also add a bit of interest and dimension. Next, I used the Cozy Wishes die set and cut out all the pieces, like a Santa, a penguin, and even a reindeer. And by the way, you can also use it with the gingerbread man. For this card, I'm creating a penguin and I'll show you how I do that. I'm using a mix of Altenews glitter cardstock from my stash. For the sentiment, I'll use the clear stamp and die of the month that includes both the clear stamps and coordinating dies. I'll heat emboss the winter cheer sentiment off camera to save time, and I'll be right back. Alright, time to put the penguin together. I'm keeping the cutting guide nearby as it tells me exactly which dies are required for which parts of the complete design. Here's the die set, and I'll grab the ones that cut the penguin's body. It also shows which pieces are for the mug, the cheeks, and the beak. I'll pop these onto my die catcher so I don't lose any of these tiny dies. I've already cut the body from black glitter cardstock. It's tricky to see on camera, but in person, I can see the etched line that will guide me where to place the face and the belly. The beak is this tiny die cut, but I'll color it with an orange alcohol marker before I glue it on. Alcohol markers work beautifully on glitter paper, by the way. You can probably see the etched guide where the beak goes. I'm just going to add some glue and press it in place. Next are the cheeks, tiny circles that I'll color pink. By the way, I'm not worried about getting alcohol ink on my glass mat. It's easy to clean up with a spritz of rubbing alcohol. The mug handle comes with the base and detail layers, which I'll put together. I've also cut a little candy cane. The whipped cream is a layering die as well, and I cut out the details in blue and white to see which one I like better, and I decided I like the white on white better. Here you're seeing me use the negative pieces of the whipped cream. That's because I didn't cut it out with the base layer. However, I thought it looked more realistic, so I didn't bother to correct myself. The top of the mug goes at the base of the whipped cream along the straight edge, and I'll let that set while I work on the scarf layers. I'll add a little heart embellishment and then attach the mug handle. Now let's assemble the card base. I'm adding foam tape behind the narrow hot foil panel for dimension. Next, I'll attach the main panel to my card base with foam tape before adhering the penguin and finishing the card. I'm using the corner of my scoring board to help keep everything aligned. I realized I exposed the adhesive on the wrong side, so I just flipped the card base around for convenience. Once the panel seems aligned, I'll peel away the rest of the release paper and press the panel down on the card base. Time to figure out where the sentiment will go since it's a long one. I think the bottom works best, so I'll add the mug first and then the sentiment after. I'll use foam tape behind the upper portion of the mug since it's going to hang over the narrow panel that's already raised with foam tape. I want to support the areas that will rest on the embossed background. To get that narrow piece of foam tape to curve along the contour of the handle, I'll remove the backing paper, which makes it easier to shape the foam tape. I'm adding glue because the embossed background presents a very bumpy surface, and a little extra adhesive will help hold everything in place. I'll attach sentiment with a narrow strip of foam tape. I almost forgot the candy cane. And that's our finished penguin card. Isn't it adorable? Now here's the last card, but unfortunately I forgot to turn on the camera to film the card making process. But it's a very simple and adorable card that possibly doesn't need a lot of explanation. I used the Nordic Noel embossing folder of the month for the red background, and I matted the panel with some brushed gold cardstock. I used a label die from Spellbinders to create the white grounding element for our gingerbread man, which of course you saw me create in the gift tag segment. I also added a heat emboss sentiment that I created using the clear stamp and die of the month, and completed the design with a cute little bow from my stash. And that's all there is to it. Very easy but adorable. If you'd like to check out how I use my favorite crafting tools, which not only have multiple uses but are affordable too, you must check out this video here.